Welcome, I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the Conscious Business Show on the BVTV network. I love it when guests say yes to coming back on BVTV to chat with me. So often my guest has so much to say of real value to you, but again, so often time is limited. Today, my return guest is an expert on a subject that is so very important today, and one in which I suggest every conscious leader needs some grounding. Let's not waste that precious time and quickly say welcome to the founder of Flourishing Introverts. Hello again, Joanna Rawbone.
Thank you. And thank you for having me back, Malcolm.
Oh, delight. I was so delighted when you said come back, because it's such an important subject, apart from meeting you, of course. Joanna, when we last talked, we discussed the differences between introverts and extroverts. In this interview, I want to focus on the value introverts can bring to a business. But first, in this question, refresh us with your definition of introverts and extroverts.
Certainly, yeah. And it's always the most important place to start, I think, because there are still so many myths and misconceptions about what introversion is. So I go back to the original Jungian definition, and Jung noticed that actually the brains of introverts and extroverts are different. We're wired differently. And introverts recharge by being quiet, by often doing solo activities because they're already overstimulated mentally. So they don't need that external stimulation. And in fact, that's what drains their batteries, which is exactly the opposite for the extroverts. So extroverts and introverts means inward looking, extrovert outward looking. And extroverts are recharged by social interaction, change, and active experiences. So what drains one charges the other. And that's where some of the tension and misunderstanding can come from.
Ah, got that now. Now, let's look at the question of value that introverts can bring to a business in this altered world, especially. What's your thoughts?
In terms of the altered world, what I see is that so many more organizations are adopting an agile approach. You know, we've heard of many organizations choosing not to insist on everyone goes back into the workplace, for instance. So we're looking at that flexibility. And the value I think introverts bring naturally is that they tend to be more independent when they're working. They tend to be more resourceful. So they kind of demand less time and energy from people, because in order for them to do their best work, they need fewer interruptions, time and space to work quietly. So that independence means that when people are working from home, providing their home is an introvert friendly space, it means they're probably more productive than even in the workplace. Because imagine in a busy open plan office where there's lots going on, they're going to find it hard to get their head down and really focus and do their best work. So I think there's something there about the independence, the resourcefulness of introverts, which means they're typically at an advantage, I think, if we're talking about having more blended approaches to working. I think there's also something about they have a natural calm and quiet about them. So frankly, when the rest of the world is a bit frantic and anxious, you know, all of those things, one of the things that introverts bring is a calmness to the situation. And we know that behavior breeds behavior. So if the introverts can be there, be present and calm, it's likely to calm a situation down for the people that they're interacting with as well.
Hey, that's fascinating. At the Conscious Business, we're focused on the ideal conscious leader. Some call it compassionate leadership. How would you expect such a person to be doing and thinking at this time in respect of his or her introvert team members?
That's such an important point, isn't it? The compassion and, you know, consciousness, compassion do go hand in hand, clearly. And for me, being compassionate is about really being present in the moment, being really aware of how I feel and the impact of my behavior on other people. So that link to emotional intelligence that we've talked about before as well. So I think there's something about when I'm really present to a situation, I'm also present to notice what's going on with other people, because when we start to really observe, when we start to really pick up some of the signals that are there, they're there loud and clear, but often we're too busy doing or speaking to notice. So for me, compassionate leadership is about honoring the true differences and the strengths that everyone brings to a situation, and creating opportunities for people to play to those strengths rather than trying to force a square peg into a round hole. Let's find the round holes for the round pegs, and let's have some compassion for the difference, the genuine difference that people bring to a situation.
Brilliant. Yes. Viewers and listeners, I hope you're enjoying listening to Joanna here. And just before we move on to the next question, I'll just remind you, on the screen behind me is her URL, which is flourishingintroverts.com. Flourishingintroverts.com for those who are listening, and flourishingintroverts.com to write down for those who are viewing. Joanna, how can you at Flourishing Introverts help leaders become conscious, aware, understanding of their team members who are introverts? After all, that leader can go around saying, put up your hand if you're an extrovert or introvert, can they?
No, and if they did, they would find it would probably fail dismally, because of course the extroverts would be like this and kind of, hands up quickly. And because we still seem to think that there's something wrong with introverts, that, they're too quiet, there's something going on, then the introverts are less likely to own up and declare the fact that, yes, I'm an introvert. Plus, I'm running a program at the moment called Frustrated to Flourishing. And some of the people on that program are in their 40s and 50s and only just finding out that they're an introvert. They've been told they're different. They know they're different. They've been encouraged to be more extroverted. But all of a sudden they go, that's what's going on for me. Then with that self-awareness, they can then understand how to make the most of their introversion and stop pretending. So I think it's about really, you're right, not sticking hands up, because that won't work, but a program of education. I was on a summit recently, which was around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so much, most good organizations will have their diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda and their policies in place, but not many of them focus on the neurodiversity. So I think there's something here as well about, let's think broader than the age, the gender, the ethnicity, all of those things, and really focus as well, make sure that we're including the neurodiversity in order to have a properly robust policy, and to make sure that actually what we're doing is genuinely including everyone in our standard practices and policies, quite honestly.
Really, really interesting. I like that neurodiversity thinking. What can the ROI, return on investment, be on having real consciousness of how to care for and inspire introvert team members?
Most organizations will know the cost of recruitment. So the idea here, a bit like ordinary businesses with their clients, the idea is to recruit and is to retain and grow a client. And the same applies with any employees of an organization. What you want to do is recruit the right people. So there is something here about making sure that your recruitment processes are also unbiased, that we're taking into account that neurodiversity. And then it's about growing the talent within to retain them. So the inspiring of, frankly, everybody, I don't think it matters whether they're introvert or extrovert or not, but the inspiring of people comes when what they know is that they're heard, they're understood, and they're given opportunities to grow, develop, and do something they are good at and love every day. So that retention and engagement piece is where the return on investment really comes. So it might cost a bit in education up front, but they're going to get it back in bucket loads at the end.
Excellent. Okay, let's imagine one of the CEOs watching this says, Joanna sounds exactly what I need to understand my team. But then again, I'm not sure. Let's get her in for a chat with me. What's your approach to such a situation and your usual workflow if asked to work with him or her and their team?
Yeah. And this is happening more and more, which of course is delighting me at the moment. And those initial conversations are typically happening virtually, Zoom or Teams or whatever is the client's preferred kind of platform, really.
Mm-hmm.
But I always start with an informal conversation, because what I want to do is I want to understand the key drivers. What was it that had that CEO say, I think we need to talk to Joanna? Because I want to understand how they perceive the problem at the moment, what their measures might be. So, for instance, do they have too high a turnover of people? Are they spending too much on recruitment? Maybe are they not investing in the right kind of development? So I want to understand the problem. Then when we agree to work together, and I see that as it has to fit for both sides. So I don't say yes to every client that comes to work with me either. Because what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, audit their practices and processes to understand where bias may be sitting, whether that's conscious or unconscious bias. And that can be in things like the recruitment processes, like the development programs, like the promotion programs. All of those things can contain that bias. And once we've done the audit to spot where that is, it's then about creating a solution that addresses each one of those areas of bias. So there's typically an education program, and what we need to do is make sure that everyone understands that. So sometimes there are videos that we put out that we help people understand, so that we, I suppose, raise awareness of the fact that when I may be saying or doing something favoring somebody because they are more outspoken, they're more outgoing, and missing the talents of somebody who's quieter. And once we've undertaken the changes, the education, any changes in practices and processes, we then look at what's needed to hold the gain. So we make sure that, you know, we've got a kind of relapse prevention strategy in place, because humans are humans. What we do is we slip back into the old ways of doing things. So what we put in place is a really robust program, so that once we've addressed it, once we've changed it, it holds, and we know that we're going to get that return on investment that we talked about.
Excellent. Joanna, just before I go into my penultimate question, I'd like to apologize to viewers that sometimes I've gone out of focus. And the reason is I've got myself so entranced in what Joanna's saying that I haven't been managing the controls of the camera correctly. So my apologies there. But that also allows me the time just to remind you of Joanna's URL on the screen behind me, which is flourishingintroverts.com, flourishingintroverts.com. Okay, Joanna, that penultimate question then. If a company seeks to deliver extra care and consideration on its team members and who are introverts, thinking they can make them become extroverts, surely this is wrong thinking. And if they do lavish extra support on their introvert team members, could it be considered an intrusion on the privacy of that employee?
This is such an important question. So thank you for asking that one, Malcolm. The reality is that introverts don't want extra support.
Yeah.
because you're right, that seems to imply that actually there's something wrong with them again, that they need, you know, that they're broken, they need fixing in some way. What introverts are looking for is that true equity and inclusion. So if there are problem-solving meetings, let's just have them on the hoof and work with that spontaneous problem solving. Send me the information in advance so that I can work through it in my own time, and then bring to the meeting my considered views and opinions. So what we need to do is make sure that those processes that we talked about don't exclude or in some way limit the opportunities of introverts to contribute fully. I'm sure most people who run meetings will have encountered someone in a meeting who's pretty quiet, and then an hour or two later, they'll approach the chairperson and say, I've been thinking about. And that's the standard introvert thing, because our communication process is different. Whereas extroverts tend to have that say, think, say approach, introverts think, say, think. So if you put them on the spot with a question, they're going to want to think that through to give you their really considered opinion. So we don't want extra support. That in a way, that's the last thing we want, because we don't like too much attention on ourselves. What we do want is equitable inclusion, so that we know that our views, our great work is taken as seriously as some of the more outspoken people. I've joked with friends recently and said that the older I'm getting, the more I notice I'm not easily impressed. And there's something here about, I seem to be able to sniff out at 100 paces somebody who's not authentic, who's incongruent in some way. And I think it's because introverts typically have a really acute sense of listening, which means we listen with our eyes as well as our ears. So we notice so much. So it is really about making sure that whatever we're doing it authentically. And if that means being vulnerable in the process, let's do that as well, because that's part of compassionate leadership too.
Brilliant. And that's the answer to that question, Joanna. I suggest to my viewers you want to replay a few times and also pass on to some of your colleagues. Think, say, think is, and those sort of approaches are absolutely brilliant. Well done, Joanna. Look, we're on the final question. You've done this with me before, and you know I like to give all my guests 3 wishes. If I was to give you, it's because it's cheap to do, you see. If I was to give you 3 wishes about how companies can get extroverts and introverts working in cohesion, what would your 3 wishes be?
My first one, and I'm cheating, Malcolm, because it's not really about organizations, but let me tell you why I want it as a wish. I want introversion and extroversion to be understood in early years education, because I think what will happen then is, once we have a whole generation growing up understanding the difference and valuing the difference, it'll stop becoming an issue in organizations. So I'm going to cheat on that first wish, if I may.
No, brilliant. Yeah.
The second wish is that I really wish organizations would take a long, hard look at their diversity, equity, and inclusion policy to just check that they have taken into account the neurodiversity aspect. Because we've talked about, how expensive recruitment can be, how important retention is. And if we're going to get people working well together, we need to stop the jibes like, oh, you're always so quiet. Why don't you have anything to say? Let's bring a real understanding to that. And my third wish, and it's for more than introverts, it's for anyone in any kind of situation, is allow people to play to their strengths. Take the time to understand what people's real strengths are. And remember, strengths aren't just the things they're good at, because that's just performance, frankly. Strengths are the things we're good at and that we really enjoy doing, that strengthen us. So let's understand people's real strengths and give them the opportunity to play to those strengths.
Joanna Rawbone, you've delivered incredible value in your interview. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting you again. Thank you for allowing me to do so.
Thank you, Malcolm. It's been a pleasure.